I never thought this would happen to me. You always hear about stuff like this happening to other people, but when it's you, it feels like your whole world just unravels in an instant. But let me start from the beginning, because this story is too wild, and I'm still trying to piece it all together. It all started with my best friend, Jason. Jason and I had been friends for years, since high school. We were the kind of friends who could go months without talking and pick up exactly where we left off. He was always there for me, and I like to think I was there for him, too. He was the one who stood by me during my wedding. He was the best man. We were close, like brothers. I trusted him with everything. So when Jason started talking about his new lady 2 months ago, I didn't think much of it. It wasn't unusual for him to mention a fling here and there. Jason had always been the ladies' man. But something about the way he talked about her was different. He was almost obsessed. Every time we hung out, it was the same. He'd pull up photos, show me her Instagram, tell me every little detail about their dates. "Man, you gotta meet her," he'd say. "She's got this wild side, I love it." At first, I thought, okay, cool. Jason's got a new girlfriend, and he's just excited. But then it became clear that this wasn't just a fling. He was head over heels. He started talking about her every chance he got. "Oh, I took her to that new restaurant we like." Or, "We went hiking, and she was just amazing." He was so damn proud of himself. I couldn't help but get annoyed after a while. Not because I didn't like the idea of him being happy, but because it felt like that's all he talked about. I'd been married for almost 5 years by then, and while things with my wife, Megan, weren't perfect, they were fine. We didn't have the same kind of spark we used to, but we had a routine. We were both busy with work and life, but that was normal, right? Jason, however, seemed like he had all the time in the world to talk about this woman. One night, we were hanging out at my place. It was just the two of us, beers in hand, talking about nothing in particular. But then, of course, the topic shifted back to her. Jason pulled out his phone and swiped through pictures of his new mistress, as he called her. "Look, man," he said with a grin. "This is her at the beach. She looks so damn good in a bikini. And this one." He turned the phone toward me, but before I even looked, I could already tell from the excitement in his voice that it was a big deal to him. I glanced at the screen, ready for another picture of some random woman. But then, my heart stopped. The woman in the photo was Megan. I stared at the picture for what felt like an eternity. It wasn't just any picture. It was a picture of Megan laughing, standing on a beach. She was wearing sunglasses, a swimsuit, and looked exactly how she had the last time I saw her. Jason kept talking, oblivious to the fact that my world had just collapsed. "She's something else, man," he was saying. "I can't believe how lucky I am. I just had to show you this one, you know?" I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what was happening, but nothing made sense. I had to look closer. I had to make sure I wasn't seeing things. I looked back at the phone screen, zoomed in on Megan's face. It was her. There was no doubt. But why? How? Was this some kind of joke? I managed to get my voice back, but it was shaky, like I was about to lose it. "Jason, what the hell is going on?" He glanced at me, confused. "What do you mean, man?" He laughed like it was no big deal, but there was a hint of nervousness in his voice. "It's just a picture. You know, Megan's a cool chick. We had fun that day." That's when it hit me. My wife, was the woman he'd been talking about for 2 months. He wasn't just bragging about some random mistress. He was bragging about my wife. I felt the blood rush to my head. My vision went blurry for a second. I was furious. I was beyond furious. Jason, my best friend, had been sleeping with my wife. He had been talking about it in front of me, knowing damn well I had no clue. I stood up so fast I knocked over my beer. It spilled across the table, but I didn't even notice. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. No, I was shaking with anger. My chest felt tight, and every breath I took felt like it was burning in my lungs. Jason looked up at me, still grinning, like he had no idea what was coming. "What's wrong, man? I thought you'd be happy for me. You always told me to find someone like her." I didn't say a word. I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. I walked over to him. The room felt like it was spinning, but I didn't care. I reached out and grabbed his arm, jerking him out of the chair. I didn't even think about it, I just reacted. Before he could say anything, I shoved him back, knocking him into the wall. The force of it was enough to rattle the pictures on the wall. "Are you out of your mind?" I hissed. Jason looked at me, finally registering the anger in my eyes. His cocky smile faltered. He opened his mouth, but I didn't give him a chance to explain. I pushed him again, harder this time. My mind was racing, but all I could think about was Megan, my wife, and what she had done. I couldn't process it all, but the rage took over. I didn't care about anything except making sure Jason knew exactly what he had done to me. "How long?" I forced out, my voice barely a whisper. Jason seemed to freeze, like he realized for the first time that maybe he had crossed a line. But the thing is, he didn't even seem sorry. "About 2 months," he said, looking away. "It just happened, man. I didn't plan it." 2 months. 2 months of her lying to me. 2 months of my best friend betraying me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like a nightmare. I should have been more suspicious, more aware of the signs. But now, it was too late. I didn't say anything else. I just walked out of the house, without another word. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. All I knew was that everything had just changed. And I had no idea how far I was willing to go for revenge. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I walked out into the night air, the cold hitting my skin like a slap, but I didn't care. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, memories, and questions that didn't make sense. I had to get out of there. I had to process everything. Jason, my best friend. The guy who knew every detail of my life, every secret, every moment. He'd been sleeping with my wife. And I didn't even know. For 2 months, he'd been laughing and joking with me about his new lady, never once thinking to give me a hint. And Megan, my wife, the woman I thought I knew so well, how could she do this to me? How could she betray me with someone I trusted more than anyone else? The images from that night kept playing in my mind. Megan's face on that beach, her smile in the picture. It wasn't just the shock of the betrayal. It was the realization that I had been so blind. How many times had I looked at her and thought everything was fine? We'd had our issues, sure, but who doesn't? It was normal, right? But now, looking back, I could see the cracks, the signs I had ignored. The late nights at work, the weird texts, the times when she seemed distant. I should have noticed, should have paid attention. But I didn't. I was too busy with my own life, too focused on my own routine. As I walked down the street, I had no idea where I was going. I didn't even know what I was doing. I just kept walking, trying to outrun the storm in my mind. My thoughts were spiraling, racing faster than I could keep up. And then it hit me. I needed to confront her. No, I had to confront her. But I couldn't do it like this. I couldn't just go back home, storm through the door, and demand answers. I was too angry. Too furious. I needed to calm down first, or else things would get ugly. I found myself outside a bar, the neon sign buzzing in the dark. I didn't want to go in, but something in me just snapped. I needed to numb the anger, to drown out the voice in my head that kept repeating everything I'd just learned. So I stepped inside. The bar was dimly lit, the air thick with the hum of quiet conversation and clinking glasses. I walked to the counter, sat down, and ordered a drink. I didn't even care what it was. Anything to take the edge off. The bartender slid me a whiskey, and I downed it in one gulp, the burns spreading through my chest. I ordered another. And another. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in my own thoughts, but when the alcohol started to hit, I realized I wasn't getting any answers. I wasn't any closer to understanding why this had happened. It wasn't just betrayal. It was personal. They hadn't just hurt me, they had humiliated me. They had broken the bond that I thought was unbreakable. My wife and my best friend. It was like a punch in the gut. I didn't feel any better after the drinks, but I felt numb. That was something, at least. As I stumbled out of the bar, I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but I needed to do something, anything, to get control of the situation. I called Megan. The phone rang and rang. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. I left a message this time, my voice unsteady but firm. Megan, we need to talk. Now. I didn't know what I was going to say when I saw her. I didn't even know what I was hoping for. But I couldn't just let it go. Not like this. Not without an explanation. I didn't want to go home just yet. I didn't want to see her face, at least not until I could think clearly. So, I found myself driving. I didn't care where I was going, just that I needed space to think. After a while, I ended up at a park. It was quiet, the world still and calm, a stark contrast to the chaos inside my head. I sat on a bench, staring into the darkness. I tried to piece everything together, but it wasn't making sense. And then, like a punch to the gut, the truth hit me. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and let this slide. I couldn't pretend that everything was going to be okay. Jason had betrayed me. Megan had betrayed me. I couldn't just walk away from this. I wasn't that kind of man. But what was I supposed to do? I couldn't just let them off the hook, could I? No. I had to make them understand what they had done. I had to show them the consequences of their actions. I had to make sure they knew that they couldn't hurt me like this and get away with it. And that's when I knew. I couldn't just confront them, talk it out, and walk away. That wasn't enough. I had to make them feel the weight of this betrayal. I had to take control of the situation. I wasn't sure how I would do it yet, but I knew one thing for sure: Megan and Jason wouldn't get off easy. And that thought gave me some twisted sense of relief. I sat in that park for what felt like hours, but time didn't really matter anymore. I was trapped in my own head, the thoughts circling endlessly. I had to do something. The anger had shifted now. It wasn't just about getting revenge anymore. It was about making them understand. Making them feel the pain that I was feeling. I could have confronted Megan then and there, but I knew I wasn't in the right state of mind. I needed to be sharp. I needed to think this through. I wasn't going to just storm in there and make a scene. No, I wanted them to understand that their actions had consequences. I wanted them to regret it. But how? How could I make them regret what they had done? That's when it came to me. A part of me was disgusted by the idea, but the other part, no, the part that had been hurt, betrayed, humiliated, was desperate for justice. I needed leverage. I needed something to make them see what they had done to me, to make them realize that they couldn't just walk away without paying the price. I picked up my phone again. This time, it wasn't to call Megan. It wasn't to leave another message. No, this time I was dialing someone else. "Hey, man," I said when the phone picked up. "It's me." "Hey, man." "What's up?" came the voice on the other end. It was Josh, an old buddy of mine. We hadn't talked much lately, but he was the kind of guy who could get things done. Things that might seem a little outside the lines. I had known him for years, and I trusted him. "I need your help," I said, the words sounding strange coming out of my mouth. "I need to get some information. About Megan. About Jason. I need to know everything. And I need it fast." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear Josh thinking. "You sure about this, man? You know I don't mess around with stuff like this." "I'm sure," I said, my voice steely. "I need to know where they've been, what they've been doing. I need to see it with my own eyes." "All right, I got you," Josh finally said. "I'll make some calls. You'll have everything you need. Just be careful, okay? Don't do something you'll regret." But that wasn't the kind of advice I was looking for. I wasn't asking for permission. I didn't care about regrets anymore. They were already dead to me, both of them. After hanging up, I leaned back against the bench and stared up at the dark sky, the faint glow of the streetlights casting long shadows over the park. I felt numb, almost like I wasn't really here. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, but the anger was still there, simmering under the surface, ready to boil over. I waited for Josh's call. When it came, a few hours later, I was ready. "They'd been meeting up at a place you wouldn't expect," Josh said, his voice low. "A hotel. Over in the next town. They'd been sneaking around for weeks. And I got footage of them." My stomach churned. I could feel my grip tightening on the phone as I processed the words. It was worse than I'd thought. Not only had they been seeing each other, but they'd been so careless about it. I didn't even hesitate. "Send me everything. Now." He did. Minutes later, I was looking at video footage of Jason and Megan, walking hand in hand into the hotel, their faces full of smiles like they were the perfect couple. I didn't even know what to think anymore. I wasn't sure if I should feel more betrayed or disgusted. They had been so confident, so sure of themselves. The footage didn't lie. Megan, my wife, the woman I trusted, was in Jason's arms. There was no denying it. She was the one who had crossed the line first. But what struck me the hardest was how easy it seemed for her. There was no hesitation, no guilt. It was like she was living a whole other life behind my back. But now I had the evidence. I looked at the screen again. Jason had his arm around her waist. Megan was laughing, looking up at him the same way she used to look at me. The way she used to look at me before things started to change. And that's when I knew what I had to do. It was time to make my move. I wasn't going to sit back and let this go. I wasn't going to just forgive them and pretend everything was fine. They needed to understand that their actions had consequences. But how would I do it? How would I get to them? I thought for a second. The answer was obvious. I had to get them in the same place, at the same time. I had to make them face the truth. I had to give them a taste of their own medicine. So, I made another call. This one was to Megan. She didn't answer, of course. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I left a message, my voice cold and calculated. "We need to talk. You, me, and Jason. Tonight. You know where. Be there." I hung up before I could say more. There was no point in dragging it out. No more games. No more pretending everything was okay. I knew she'd be there. She wouldn't be able to resist. And when she showed up, Jason would be right behind her. And then, I'd make them see. Make them feel everything I'd been holding inside. I wasn't going to let this go. Not without a price. I spent the rest of the night pacing, trying to keep my mind clear and focused. My pulse was still racing from the evidence Josh had given me, video footage of Jason and Megan together. But I couldn't afford to lose control. Not yet. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. Not without feeling the weight of it. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was hurt. And I had learned the hard way that when you're hurt, you don't think straight. So, I had to make sure I stayed calm, no matter how much I wanted to scream, no matter how much I wanted to tear everything apart. I needed to be smart about this. The plan was simple, or at least it seemed simple. I had texted Megan earlier that day, telling her to meet me at the old diner on the outskirts of town. It was a place we'd been to a few times when we were dating, before the marriage, before all the complications. I figured it was neutral ground. But the truth was, I had no idea what kind of reaction I would get. Would she be scared? Would she try to lie? Or would she confess right away? But no matter what, she was going to be there. It was already midnight by the time I made my way to the diner. The parking lot was nearly empty, the only sound being the hum of the neon sign above the entrance. I sat in my car for a few minutes, the air thick with anticipation. I felt a weight in my chest, a heaviness I couldn't shake. And then, the headlights appeared in the distance. I knew it was her. I didn't have to look twice. My heart pounded harder as I watched her pull into the lot and park, almost as if she knew what was coming. Maybe she did. Maybe she suspected. But either way, this was happening. I took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the diner's entrance. The cold night air bit at my skin, but I didn't care. It was nothing compared to what I was about to face. The diner had that old, tired look to it, booths that needed reupholstering and faded red vinyl seats. The smell of coffee and grease hung in the air. It was the kind of place you'd expect to find a quiet conversation, maybe a first date, or a meeting you didn't want anyone else to know about. As I stepped inside, I saw her sitting in the corner booth. Megan. She looked just like she always did, beautiful, confident, but now, I couldn't help but feel like I was seeing her for the first time. This wasn't the woman I thought I knew. This was a stranger, sitting there pretending everything was fine. She looked up when I walked in, her face unreadable. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. It was as if she had no idea what I was about to do. "Hey," she said softly, her voice trying to sound normal. Too normal. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, staring at her. Her eyes flickered nervously, but she still didn't say anything. "Sit down," she said, motioning to the booth across from her. "What's going on? You sound serious." I could hear the tremor in her voice, but I didn't care. I was past caring. I wasn't here for pleasantries. I slid into the booth, keeping my eyes locked on hers. "You don't need to pretend anymore," I said, my voice steady but low. "I know everything." She froze for a moment, her face going pale. Then, a nervous laugh escaped her lips, almost like she was trying to cover up the panic in her eyes. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice cracking. "What are you talking about?" I took a breath and pulled out my phone, tapping the screen until the footage of her and Jason came up. I turned the phone around, sliding it toward her. Her eyes widened when she saw the images. For a brief moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at the screen, her face draining of color. I let the silence hang in the air for a few seconds before speaking again, my voice almost cold. 2 months. You've been with him for 2 months, haven't you? Behind my back. Laughing at me, while I thought everything was fine. Her lips trembled. "It's not like that," she whispered, but I could hear the guilt in her voice. I didn't let her finish. "You've been lying to me. To my face. For weeks." My voice grew louder, more intense. "I thought you loved me. I thought we were happy. But you were with him the whole damn time." She reached across the table, her hand trembling as she tried to touch mine. "Please, just let me explain." But I pulled my hand away, not wanting to be touched by her anymore. I wasn't interested in her explanations. I wasn't interested in her lies. I was done. No more explanations. I'm done listening to your excuses. You and Jason. I stopped myself before I could say anything else. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of hearing me break down. Instead, I turned toward the door, expecting her to chase after me, expecting her to beg for my forgiveness. But she didn't. She just sat there, staring at the phone in front of her, unable to meet my eyes. "Where's Jason?" I asked coldly. "Jason?" She blinked, clearly caught off guard. I leaned in, narrowing my eyes. "Don't act like you don't know. He's not coming, is he? He's not stupid enough to show up here." For a moment, there was silence. Then, she spoke again, almost in a whisper. He's not coming. He didn't want to see you." My heart dropped. Not because I was surprised, but because it confirmed everything I already knew. Jason, my best friend, didn't even have the courage to face me. I looked at Megan one last time. "I hope he's worth it." I stood up and walked out of the diner without another word, leaving her sitting there alone. I didn't care anymore. But the feeling of betrayal was still there, gnawing at my insides. And I wasn't done with either of them. Not by a long shot. I walked out of that diner feeling like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. Megan hadn't even tried to stop me. Not really. It was like she had already given up, already resigned herself to whatever consequences she thought were coming. And that was the thing that stung the most, how easy it seemed for both of them. I didn't even look back as I got into my car. My hands were still shaking, but this time it wasn't from anger. It was something else. Something darker. Something I couldn't quite place. I drove aimlessly for a while, the world outside my window nothing more than a blur. My mind was still reeling. What now? What the hell was I supposed to do next? I thought about going home. About walking in the door and confronting Megan there, face to face. But then I thought about Jason again. About how he'd betrayed me, too. How, for months, he'd been playing me for a fool. I couldn't deal with all of that at once. I pulled into a small parking lot near the edge of town. The air was cold, but it didn't bother me. I was beyond caring about the cold, or anything, really. I needed to think. My phone buzzed in my pocket, breaking the silence of the night. I didn't want to answer. I knew who it was. But something made me pull it out anyway. It was Megan. Please. I know you're upset, but we need to talk. Please, just come home. We can fix this. I never meant to hurt you. Her words made my stomach turn. She wasn't sorry. Not really. She was just trying to salvage whatever dignity she had left. Trying to make it sound like this was something that could be fixed. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel. You need to understand something, Megan. I typed, my fingers shaking as I tried to find the right words. You don't get to fix this. You don't get to come back from this. This is over. And I'm done. I hit send and stared at the screen for a moment, watching the little bubbles pop up as she typed her response. I didn't wait to see it. Instead, I leaned back against the seat, my hands still gripping the wheel. For the first time, I felt the weight of everything I'd just learned. The reality of it was sinking in. Megan was gone. Jason, too. They weren't just two people I'd been close to, they were the people I'd trusted with my life, with my future. And they had shattered that trust in a way that left me hollow. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. I couldn't face the place where she'd laughed and talked about her day with me 1 minute, and then sneaked around with my best friend the next. The next day, I didn't hear from either of them. No calls. No texts. Nothing. Part of me was relieved. I didn't want to hear their apologies or excuses. But another part of me felt empty. Like I was waiting for something. Waiting for them to at least try and make it right. But I knew better. They were both cowards. The days that followed were a blur. I didn't go to work. I didn't talk to anyone. I just stayed in my apartment, drinking, pacing, trying to figure out what to do next. I wasn't sure if I was angry at Megan or Jason more, but it didn't matter. What they had done was unforgivable. A week passed. Then 2. And then I got a message from Jason. It was short, cold, and to the point. We need to talk. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me wanted to block him, to never hear from him again. But another part of me knew I had to face this. I couldn't avoid it forever. I wasn't the type to back down, especially not now. So I replied. Meet me at the same diner. Same time. Be there. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't care what he had to say. I didn't care if he had some pathetic explanation or if he was just looking for a way to absolve himself. I was done with excuses. The night of the meeting, I arrived early. The diner was quiet, just like the last time. A few cars in the parking lot. I took a seat in the same booth, waiting. Jason showed up 10 minutes late. He looked disheveled, like he hadn't been sleeping. His eyes were tired, but there was something else in them. Regret, maybe? Or was it fear? He sat across from me, his hands resting on the table. He didn't speak at first. He just stared at me, like he wasn't sure where to begin. I didn't give him the chance. I've been thinking. I started, my voice calm, almost too calm. I've been thinking about everything you did. Everything I've lost because of you. Jason shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Look, man, I know I screwed up, he said, his voice low. I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. But things just happened with Megan. I didn't plan it. I couldn't believe the audacity. The way he said it, like it was some accident, some mistake he had no control over. As if he didn't have a choice. You think I care about your excuses? I cut him off. You and Megan. You think you can just waltz back into my life and say sorry and everything will be okay? You've ruined everything. And now you want to fix it with some pathetic apology? Jason opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't let him speak. You've already said enough, I said, my voice icy. I'm done with both of you. There's nothing you can say that's going to fix this. There's nothing that's going to make it right. He sat there in stunned silence, like he hadn't expected me to be this angry, this final. Maybe he thought I would forgive him, or that I would at least hear him out. But no. This was bigger than me. It was bigger than Jason, too. Jason stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I never wanted things to end like this, man, he said, his voice cracking. I didn't want to lose you. You already have, I said, standing up as well. You both have. I walked out of the diner without another word, leaving him standing there speechless. And as I drove home, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't just done with them. I was done with the past, with all the lies, with everything that had led me to this point. It was over. I spent the next few days in a daze. The world around me felt like a blur. I was no longer the person I had been before all of this. It was like the life I'd built, my marriage, my friendship with Jason, was nothing but a carefully constructed facade that had crumbled to dust. I didn't know who I was anymore, and I didn't know what to do next. The emptiness was overwhelming. Megan didn't reach out after that night. I didn't expect her to, honestly. What could she possibly say that would change anything? But there was still that nagging feeling, like I was waiting for some kind of sign, some form of closure. But I knew there would be none. I had seen the truth with my own eyes, and the truth didn't need any more explanations. Jason, on the other hand, tried calling me a couple of times after our meeting. At first, I ignored it. But after the third or fourth time, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the anger, or maybe I just wanted him to hear how broken he made me. I picked up the phone. Hello? I said, my voice cold and unfeeling. Hey, it's me. Jason's voice came through, hesitant. Look, man, I know you don't want to talk to me, and I get it. But I need you to understand that I never meant for any of this to happen. I was stupid, and I messed up, but I want to make it right. I'm sorry. I really am. I almost laughed. You want to make it right? Jason, there's nothing you can do to make it right. You slept with my wife, and you think a couple of sorry words are going to fix it? He didn't say anything for a moment, just breathing heavily on the other end of the line. I don't know what else to say, man, he muttered. I just want to apologize. I've ruined everything. I miss our friendship, and I can't just walk away from this without trying to make things right. I shook my head even though he couldn't see me. You already did walk away, Jason. You walked away the minute you decided to betray me. There was another long silence before he spoke again. This time, his voice was quieter, more sincere. I know I messed up. I didn't realize how much I meant to you, you know? I thought I could keep everything separated. I didn't think it would come to this. I didn't respond right away. What could I say? That he was sorry? That it was all going to be okay? No. I was done with apologies. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. I don't think we can be friends anymore, I said finally, my words heavy with finality. And I don't think you and Megan have any idea what you've really taken from me. But I'm done trying to make sense of it. You two can live in whatever mess you've created, but I'm not a part of it anymore. I hung up before he could say anything else. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had control again. But even as I felt the anger starting to subside, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, the hollow ache inside me. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if I would ever be able to trust anyone again, let alone love someone. But what I did know was that I couldn't let Jason or Megan have any more of my time, my energy, my thoughts. They didn't deserve it. The following days were quiet. Too quiet. I spent a lot of time at home, trying to figure out what my next move was. I didn't want to stay in the apartment, but I couldn't bring myself to leave either. Everything felt wrong. Every corner of that place reminded me of what I had lost, what I had thought I had. I kept my phone on silent for the most part. No calls, no texts, nothing from Megan. I figured it was for the best. What was there left to say? She had made her choice, and so had I. There was nothing to salvage. But then, a week later, I got a message from her. It was a text. Short. Direct. I'm sorry. I love you. Please don't shut me out forever. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much she had hurt me. But another part of me wanted to believe it, wanted to believe that, somewhere deep inside, she still felt the way she had when we first met. But I knew better. I didn't respond. I never responded. I couldn't. A few more weeks passed, and I found myself slipping into a routine. It wasn't perfect, but it was my routine now. I started going out more. I met up with old friends, reconnected with people I hadn't seen in years. I didn't talk much about what had happened. I didn't want pity, and I didn't want to make excuses for what had happened. I wasn't the same person anymore, and I didn't expect anyone else to understand that. One night I ran into Josh at a bar. It had been a while since we'd spoken, but he was still the same old Josh. We caught up a bit, exchanged some small talk, and after a couple of beers, the topic inevitably turned to what had happened. I heard about what went down with Megan and Jason. Josh said, his voice serious. Man, I'm sorry. I don't know what the hell they were thinking. I looked at him and shrugged. Doesn't matter anymore. It's over. I'm over it. Josh shook his head, looking at me with a mixture of sympathy and something else, guilt, maybe? You're not just over it, man. You can't just act like everything's fine. I know you're hurting. I didn't answer right away. He was right, but the truth was, I didn't want to talk about it anymore. Not with him, not with anyone. It is what it is, I said finally. I've learned my lesson. And I'm moving on. But as I walked out of that bar, I knew that moving on didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending nothing had happened. It just meant learning how to live with it. Learning how to survive it. I didn't know what the future held. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let them win. Time passed, and with each day, the wounds slowly started to heal. I wouldn't say I was over it. Hell, I don't know if I'll ever truly be over it, but I'd started to carve out a new life for myself. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close to what I had imagined when I thought of my future, but it was mine. And for the first time in months, that was enough. I'd thrown myself into work. I kept busy. Too busy, maybe. But I didn't care. Work was a distraction, a way to silence the memories that still haunted me when I had too much time to think. I buried myself in it, stayed late when I didn't need to, answered emails at odd hours, just to keep my mind occupied. The weekends were a bit harder. The silence of my apartment, the empty feeling in the pit of my stomach, it got to me some days. But I wasn't about to let myself slip back into that darkness. Not again. I refused. One evening, about a month after everything went down, I went for a walk around the city. It was one of those crisp nights where the stars were visible, and the air felt fresh, like the world was slowly waking up again. I wasn't expecting anything to come of it, but I found myself walking toward a small coffee shop I used to go to with Megan. The one by the lake, where we'd sit for hours, talking about everything and nothing at all. I stood there for a moment, staring at the shop's glowing sign, feeling an odd mix of nostalgia and resentment. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face those memories, but something in me told me I had to. I walked inside. It wasn't busy. Just a few people, sipping their drinks and lost in their own worlds. I ordered a coffee and sat at a table near the window, watching the lights of the city reflect off the water. It was peaceful, but there was a gnawing feeling in the back of my mind. A part of me still felt incomplete. Then, as I sat there lost in thought, the door opened, and I saw her. Megan. She stood there for a moment, scanning the room, and when her eyes met mine, she froze. Her expression went from surprise to hesitation, and I could see the pain in her face, the same pain I knew I had caused her when I walked away. I hadn't seen her in weeks. Not since the diner. I'd avoided her messages, avoided the reminders of the life we once had. But here she was, standing in front of me. For a moment neither of us spoke. She didn't move, and I didn't either. The space between us felt heavy, like it was filled with everything we had left unsaid. "Hey," she finally said, her voice quiet but genuine. I nodded, not sure what else to say. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave, to never speak to me again. But another part of me, the part that had loved her, the part that had been heartbroken by her betrayal, felt the pull of the past. She walked toward the table, her steps tentative. When she reached it, she hesitated again before sitting down. Her eyes were searching mine, like she was trying to read me, trying to figure out what I was feeling. But I wasn't going to make it easy for her. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me," she said, her voice low. "But I couldn't just let things end like that. I've been thinking a lot about everything." I didn't say anything right away. I couldn't. My emotions were still a mess, still tangled up in the hurt, the anger, and the confusion. But I couldn't deny that I felt something seeing her again. "What do you want, Megan?" I asked finally, my voice steady but distant. "You want me to forgive you? To just forget everything?" Her face tightened at my words, but she didn't back down. "No. I don't expect you to forgive me. Not right away, at least. But I need you to know that I am sorry. For everything. For what I did to you. For what Jason and I did to you. You didn't deserve any of it." Her words hung in the air, and I had to admit, there was a part of me that wanted to believe her. But the other part, the one that had seen the betrayal up close, knew better. "You're right," I said, finally looking her in the eye. "I didn't deserve it. But I also didn't deserve to be lied to. To have my life turned upside down by two people I thought I could trust." She lowered her gaze, clearly feeling the weight of my words. "I know. I know I destroyed everything. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't even thinking about how much I would hurt you. I was just selfish." The honesty in her voice hit me harder than I expected. I could see that she regretted what had happened, but that didn't make it easier. The damage had already been done. "You hurt me more than you'll ever know," I said, my voice quieter this time. "And I don't know if I'll ever get over it. But I'm trying." She nodded slowly, like she understood. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was just heavy. Like we both knew there was so much left unsaid, but neither of us was ready to say it. After a long pause, Megan spoke again. "I don't want to ask you to forgive me. I know I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I've learned from this. I've lost the most important person in my life because of my choices. And that's something I'll have to live with forever." I looked at her, and for a brief second, I saw the woman I once loved, the woman who had been my best friend, my partner. But that was before. Before the lies, before the betrayal. "I don't know what comes next for us, Megan," I said slowly. "But I'm not the same person I was. And I can't go back to that. Not after everything that's happened." She nodded again, her eyes filling with tears. "I understand. And I'm so sorry. I truly am. I never meant for any of this." I stood up, pushing my chair back. There was nothing left to say. Nothing left to fix. Not now. "Take care of yourself, Megan," I said, turning to leave. "I hope you find what you're looking for." And with that, I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving the past behind me for good. As I stepped into the night air, I felt a strange sense of relief. Not because I had forgiven her, because I hadn't. Not because I had any illusions about what the future would look like either. But because I had finally closed that door. And sometimes that's all you can do. After I walked out of that coffee shop, I didn't look back. I couldn't. It was like stepping away from the last shred of a life I had once known, a life I thought was solid, unshakable. But as I walked into the cool night, the weight of the past finally felt like it was lifting, just a little. The days that followed felt different. It was subtle, but I could sense a shift in myself. Maybe it was the conversation with Megan, or maybe it was just the passing of time. But for the first time in a while, I felt like I was moving forward, even if I didn't have a clear path. I didn't hear from her again after that night. She didn't send any more messages or try to reach out. Part of me wondered if she was waiting for me to reach back out, but I didn't. I knew that any attempt to rekindle what we had would just bring more pain. The relationship we'd once had was gone. And I had to let it go, for both of our sakes. Jason, too, had faded out of my life. His attempts to reach me stopped after that last phone call. I assumed he tried to reach out to Megan, tried to apologize to her, but that wasn't something I cared about anymore. Jason and I didn't have a future together. I knew that for sure. So I moved on. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly. But it was progress. I started doing things for myself again. I began running, something I hadn't done in years. I'd forgotten how much it cleared my mind. In the mornings, I'd lace up my sneakers, put in my headphones, and hit the streets. The rhythmic sound of my feet on the pavement, the rush of cold air, helped silence the old ghosts. It wasn't a cure for everything, but it was a start. I also reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in a long time, real friends, the ones who had always been there, even when I had been too busy with my own life to notice. We'd grab drinks, go to games, laugh about old times. It felt good. It felt normal. But then, about 3 months after that night in the diner, I got an unexpected message. It wasn't from Megan. It wasn't from Jason. It was from an old friend I hadn't heard from in years, Katie. Katie was someone I'd known in college. We had been close once upon a time, but our lives had drifted in different directions after graduation. We lost touch, but we had always gotten along well. She was kind, funny, and I'd always thought of her as someone who brought out the best in me. I never considered anything romantic between us, but we were friends in the truest sense of the word. I hadn't expected to hear from her. Not after all this time. But when I saw her name flash on my phone, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Curiosity, maybe? Or hope. The message was simple. Hey, I know it's been a while, but I was wondering if you wanted to grab coffee sometime. I'd love to catch up. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my mind drifting back to the days before everything went wrong. Back when I was still naive enough to think I knew what my life would look like. Could I handle seeing Katie? Could I handle letting anyone back in? But there was something about the message that felt different. There was no pressure. Just an invitation to reconnect. No strings attached. I sat there for a minute, weighing the decision in my mind. It had been so long since I'd truly connected with anyone outside of my broken past. The idea of moving forward, of possibly finding something new, was terrifying. But it was also exciting. I replied, "Yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it." We set a time to meet a few days later, at a little cafe on the edge of town. I didn't know what to expect, but I was cautiously optimistic. It wasn't a date, but it was a step towards something that didn't feel like the wreckage of my past. When I walked into the cafe, I saw her almost immediately. She was sitting by the window, her back to me, and as soon as I approached, she turned and smiled. The smile was warm, genuine, nothing like the hollow expressions I had grown used to over the past few months. "Hey," she said, standing up to greet me. "It's so good to see you. I've missed you." I smiled back, feeling the first genuine smile cross my face in what felt like forever. "It's been a long time," I said, sitting down across from her. We spent the next few hours talking, about everything and nothing. She'd been living in a different city for the past few years, building a career in marketing, and I caught her up on the mess I'd made of my life since we last spoke. We laughed, reminisced, and talked about our hopes for the future. And for the first time in months, I found myself thinking, maybe I could have this. Maybe I could have a future that's different from the one I'd built before. The conversation was easy. Natural. Nothing like the tense, broken exchanges I'd had with Megan or Jason. It was just two people reconnecting, remembering who they were before everything got complicated. And it felt good. By the time we parted ways, I didn't have any grand revelations. I didn't think that meeting Katie would magically erase the pain of what had happened with Megan and Jason. But I did feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Hope that things could be different. Hope that I could be different. I wasn't rushing anything. I didn't need to. But I realized something important that day. I didn't need to carry the weight of my past with me forever. I didn't need to let it define me. There was life after betrayal. There was life after loss. And maybe, just maybe, I could find that life again. I didn't know where this was going. Maybe it would go nowhere. Maybe it would lead to something more. But for the first time in a long while, I was open to finding out. And that, I thought, was enough for now. Katie and I met a few more times after that initial coffee. Each meeting felt easier, more natural, like we were picking up where we'd left off years ago, only now, with the wisdom of everything we'd been through in the years since. The connection between us was undeniable, and yet neither of us rushed into anything. It was like we both recognized that we needed time. Time to let go of the past, time to heal, and time to learn what it meant to move forward. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever is. I still had my moments when I'd find myself thinking about Megan and Jason. Those memories would creep in, sometimes during the quiet moments, or when I was trying to fall asleep. I still felt the sting of betrayal, of what could have been, of the future I thought I was building that had been torn apart. But slowly, I began to feel a shift. A sense of freedom that I hadn't felt before. I realized that the only person who could move on from the past was me. Megan and Jason had made their choices, and while their actions had been cruel, they didn't own my future. I did. Katie didn't try to fill any gaps. She wasn't a replacement for Megan, nor did I want her to be. She was someone new, someone different, who brought a fresh perspective into my life. She didn't ask for my past, didn't ask for my broken pieces, but she made it clear that she was open to knowing me, all of me, the good, the bad, the scars. And as we spent more time together, I started to feel something I hadn't in a long time: trust. One evening, after a long walk around the city, Katie and I sat on a park bench, the sound of the breeze rustling through the trees, and the distant hum of traffic in the background. We had just finished talking about our childhoods, how we had each dealt with challenges growing up, and what we wanted for our futures. It felt easy. Comfortable. I found myself looking at her, the way she smiled, the way she spoke with passion, the way she just was. It was refreshing. "I've been thinking a lot lately," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. "About everything." Katie turned to me, her expression open, unguarded. "What about everything?" "About how I thought my life would go, about what I thought I wanted," I said, shaking my head. "It's all been so wrong, you know?" She gave a soft laugh. "Yeah, I think we've all been there. You never know where life's going to take you." I looked at her for a moment, gathering my thoughts. "The thing is, I don't want to keep holding on to all the old baggage. I don't want to let everything I've lost define what I do next." She nodded, like she understood exactly what I meant. "You're already doing that. You're not letting the past control you." I wasn't sure if I agreed with her, but I appreciated her saying it. In truth, I was still figuring out how to let go. But what I was beginning to realize was that I didn't need to have it all figured out to move forward. I want to build something new. Something real. Not based on lies or betrayal, but on honesty, on what we choose to make of it. I said, looking at her, my heart a little more open than it had been in years. Katie smiled softly, her eyes meeting mine. Then let's build it. Together. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I wasn't afraid of taking a chance, of starting fresh. The past was still there, of course. But it no longer had the power to control me. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was moving towards something better. I wasn't chasing after a version of myself that had been broken. I was becoming someone new, someone who could forgive, someone who could trust again. And maybe, just maybe, someone who could love again. The months passed by, and with each one, I felt myself shedding more and more of the past. It wasn't easy, letting go never is, but I had learned something crucial: healing wasn't a straight line. It wasn't a path you could walk on autopilot. It was messy, full of setbacks and small victories, and sometimes you had to accept that there would be no perfect resolution. But it was a resolution nonetheless. Katie and I spent more time together, and while we didn't rush into anything, there was an undeniable chemistry between us. It was as if we were finding a rhythm together, one that was different from anything I'd known before. I wasn't trying to recreate a past version of myself with her. I wasn't trying to fix anything. We were two people, building something new from scratch. There were moments of doubt, of course. There always are when you've been through the kind of heartbreak I had. I couldn't help but wonder sometimes, what if it happened again? What if I opened myself up only to have everything come crashing down? But as I looked at Katie, I saw something that gave me hope: her patience, her understanding, her willingness to take things slow, to make sure we were building something that wasn't just built on attraction or the need to fix each other. No, what we were building felt different. It felt real. One evening, after a long walk through the park, we stopped by a small cafe we both liked. We sat down, sipping our drinks, talking about our days, and the conversation turned, as it always did, to the topic of the future. I knew I'd gotten to a place where I could finally speak freely about my feelings, about where I wanted my life to go. Katie, I don't know what's going to happen between us. But I know this: what we're building feels right. She smiled at me, her eyes warm and open. It does feel right. But I think we need to take it one step at a time. We can't force anything. I nodded, grateful for her calm perspective. I'm not trying to force anything. I just know that I don't want to go through life looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next betrayal. I want to live in the present, what we have now. Katie reached across the table and took my hand in hers, her touch grounding me. I'm with you. Every step of the way. And for the first time in years, I truly believed it. I wasn't looking back at the wreckage of the past anymore. I wasn't carrying the weight of it on my shoulders. I had made peace with it. It was done. A few months later, Katie and I decided to take a weekend trip together. It was spontaneous, just the two of us, no plans except to enjoy the time away. As we drove toward the small cabin in the woods, I found myself laughing more, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. The weekend was perfect, quiet, peaceful. It was the first time in a while I felt truly relaxed. And when we sat out by the fire one night, wrapped in blankets, staring up at the stars, I realized just how much I had needed this. To not be weighed down by my past. To not be afraid of what the future held. Katie turned to me, her eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. I'm really glad we're doing this. I'm glad you're here. I smiled at her. Me too. I didn't know I needed this until I got here. But I think I'm starting to understand what it means to move on. Does it feel like moving on? She asked gently. I looked out at the stars, feeling the weight of her question. It wasn't just about moving on. It wasn't about running from the past either. It was about accepting it for what it was and choosing to live my life fully, despite what had happened. Yeah, I said, my voice soft. It feels like moving forward. Like I'm finally ready to live again. Katie smiled, and in that moment I realized something I hadn't fully understood until now. Forgiveness wasn't just about others. It was about me. It was about giving myself permission to let go, to stop punishing myself for things I couldn't change, to stop letting the scars of the past dictate my future. We didn't need to say anything more. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with an understanding that didn't need words. We were there, together, building something that was ours, something that was real. In the days and weeks that followed, we continued to grow closer. Our relationship wasn't perfect. We had our ups and downs, as every relationship does. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the downs. I wasn't afraid of the hard conversations. I knew that if we faced them, if we worked through them, we'd come out the other side stronger. And slowly, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was capable of loving again. I was capable of trusting again. I was capable of a future that wasn't defined by betrayal and heartache, but by the choices I made now. One night, as we were out for dinner, Katie reached across the table and took my hand. Her smile was soft, almost shy, as if she were unsure of how to say the words that had been on her mind. "I know we're taking things slow," she began, "but I just wanted to say that I care about you. A lot. I'm really glad I found you again." My heart skipped a beat. Those words felt like a lifeline, a promise that things could be different. That things were different. "I care about you too," I said, squeezing her hand. "I'm not sure what the future holds, but I'm glad you're in it." We sat there for a long time, just holding hands, letting the words hang in the air between us. There was no rush. No pressure. Just the understanding that we were both ready to take the next step. Together. And as I looked at Katie, I knew that the future was wide open. It was unknown, unpredictable, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't scare me. Because I wasn't facing it alone anymore.